Hello everyone, in this video we will talk about silk touch mining and portal frames in Minecraft Java Edition version 1.8. And this is interesting because it's the easiest method to obtain and portal frame items in a release version of Minecraft Java Edition. So this right here is the world download. It's very important when you join this world download, you need to have render distance 2 chunks. If you have too much render distance, it will instantly crash the game when you join it. And if you're in single player, you should be immediately on this platform right here. If you're in multiplayer, you might spawn in this spawn chunk somewhere over there, and then you need to go to the coordinates -260 and set coordinates 920, and then you're here. And view distance 2, okay. Now, once you're here, what you can do is you go in survival mode, you grab yourself a pickaxe with silk touch. You should also get yourself a speed effect. And then there are some signs here which tell you what you need to do. We turn on instant tile ticks, and this time it will actually work. And we prepare the NaN arrows. We go back and forth to unload the stronghold chunk again. We grab ourselves a silk touch pickaxe and some speed. We look at roughly 180 degrees, and then during the leg spike, we run forward. And then you need to mine the slime block right as you arrive. Like you're not allowed to wait on those pressure plates. You need to mine the slime block really quickly. And then we will quickly wait for the end of the leg spike. And here we are, the leg spike is over. And now you can see that one of the end portal frames is missing because we mined it with our silk touch pickaxe. And down here we have a hopper minecart which picks up the item so that it doesn't fall into the lava. And in here you can see we've got an end portal frame item. So that's how you get end portal frame items in 1.8 survival, by just silk touch mining them. So the fact that end portal frames drop when they are silk touch mined in 1.8 release versions was recently discovered by DNL20 and Estolit. Previously, like already a few years ago, Captain Solo figured out that it works in 1.9 snapshots, but he didn't look into 1.8 release versions because it was more difficult in 1.8 release versions. But I just wanted to mention that this is also a thing. And after DNL20 and Estolit noticed that you can do this in 1.8, RPM and myself then developed a survival-friendly setup for it. So there are many different ways to obtain end portal frame items in different versions. Some of those versions are legit versions, release versions like 1.12 or 1.8. And previously the only method to obtain end portal frame items in a release version was in 1.12 falling block exploit. And this is a very hard exploit. And in this video we will talk about an exploit which only works in 1.8, which is much easier than falling block. But you can also get end portal frame items in an easy way if you are willing to either go to beta 1.9 pre-release 3 or you go to some April Fool's snapshot. But I will just talk about the silk touch mining in this video. So when it comes to blocks, we can categorize them in 3 different levels, namely if they drop normally if you somehow destroy them in a way where they drop items, or whether they only drop as themselves if you silk touch mine them, or if they don't even drop if you silk touch mine them and they only drop the item if they are a falling block and land on like a slab or a torch or something. And in 1.8, Bedrock was a block which drops completely normally, so if you use some weird piston tricks to make it drop as an item, you can get the Bedrock item in 1.8. While in 1.12 this was changed, like Jeb coded it so that Bedrock no longer drops normally because he was afraid that there would be some glitches which allows you to get Bedrock item. So Bedrock was moved to the silk touch category. So in 1.12 if you want to get Bedrock item, you need to do either falling block or you need to silk touch mine it. And in 1.8 the end portal frame items do not drop normally, so if you try to use piston tricks with terrain population to destroy end portal frames in such a way that they do not drop as an item, but in 1.8 they are in the silk touch category. So if you somehow trick the game into silk touch mining an end portal frame, you get the end portal frame item. While in 1.12 the end portal frame was moved up into a more difficult category, and in 1.12 you cannot silk touch mine end portal frames anymore, but if you have a falling end portal frame and it drops on a torch, then you get the end portal frame item. While some other blocks, like for example mob spawners, are of course not silk touchable because you wouldn't even need any tricks to silk touch mine them. Like those were already in the falling block only category in 1.8 and stayed there in 1.12. So this method is of course heavily inspired by the 1.12 bedrock item using Silk Touch, which was discovered in 2020 by Earth Computer XCOM using an observation by land mining. Land mining figured out that if you instant mine a block and you extinguish fire at the same time, when the game first checks whether you can actually instant mine the block, then it extinguishes the fire and it sends out block updates, and those block updates can be used to activate contraptions or populate chunks, and after that it instant mines the block without checking again whether it's still the same block. So if you use the block updates from fire to load new chunks into a Taiwan population and replace the old block by a new block, then the new block gets mined and gets Silk Touched. And this was the 1.12 bedrock item idea. And to replace the block by a different block, we need to use Taiwan population. And now the difficulty is that Taiwan population only happens near unloaded chunks. But breaking blocks with Silk Touch quick access only happens nearby the player. So you can only do these tricks if you somehow get the player close to unloaded chunks. And this usually is impossible because all chunks in view distance of the player usually get loaded. So you need to use some tricks to get the player so close to unloaded chunks that you can actually do this. And in 1.12 and 1.8, these things are very different. So in 1.12, it's firstly, it's easier than in 1.8 because in 1.12, if a chunk is ungenerated, then you can actually walk to the chunk and it doesn't immediately get loaded, but only gets scheduled to be loaded in a game tick. So in 1.12, you actually have one game tick of time to get close to ungenerated chunks. Like if a chunk is already generated, when it instantly gets loaded, immediately gets loaded. But if it's ungenerated, you have one game tick of time. But in 1.12, if you're on a multiplayer server, you have difficulty that there are anti-cheat mechanisms which prevent you from moving arbitrarily far in a single lag spike. Usually you can only move 10 blocks in a lag spike, and if you walk further than that, then you get reset unless you have a lot of motion. So in 1.12 we need to give a player a lot of motion so that we can circumvent the anti-cheat, and then we can walk several chunks in a single game tick and get to unloaded chunks. In 1.8 the whole thing is different. In 1.8 if a chunk comes in view distance, then it gets loaded immediately. So you don't have one game tick of time. Like as soon as you process the player movement packet, the chunk gets loaded. So the only way you can get close to unloaded chunks in 1.8 is if you update suppress the player movement packets and throw crashes during the player movement packets so that the new chunks never get loaded. So this is much more difficult in 1.8 than in 1.12, but we have advantage in 1.8 that there are no anti-cheat mechanisms in multiplayer which put you back if you walk too far during a lag spike. So during a lag spike you can walk as far as you want, but you need to update suppress every single movement packet while you do this. So how do we update suppress all movement packets while moving to the stronghold chunk? Like this is kind of difficult because if you move from from one position several chunks to the stronghold, you will send a few hundred movement packets while you do this, and we need to update suppress every single one of them. So we need to do a few hundred update suppressions, and if you don't want to build a few hundred rail towers, each with 10,000 rails, then you need to use some heavy tricks to do this. And the first thing we use is instant tile ticks, because instant tile ticks are super crashy and those are very helpful. If you have instant tile ticks on and you step on a pressure plate, then it updates suppresses your movement packet. So the idea is we turn on instant tile ticks, and when we run over wooden pressure plates and through string, and every time we run into one of them, we get a crash. And the idea is if we crash during every single player movement packet, then the stronghold chunk will still be unloaded when we're near it. That's the basic idea, but we now have a problem with hitboxes after crossing chunk borders. Like we need to cross several chunk borders, and if you cross a chunk border during a leg spike, then the player hitbox will not be in the new chunk because the player is not registered in the entity list of a new chunk. So if you actually do this, then after you cross the chunk border, you're fine for 2 blocks, but after the 2 blocks, the wooden pressure plates no longer fine for a player hitbox, and then we don't get a crash, and then the stronghold chunk gets loaded. So we need to have some tricks so that we can actually still do update suppressions. So right here we have a chunk boundary, okay, and after the chunk boundary here we have some tripwire, and if I were to activate this tripwire it would ignite some TNT and then it would kill me, but I want to get to the diamonds over here, so I need to somehow get past this tripwire. And what you can do is you can create a lag spike. So now the game is lagged out, and during the lag spike you cross over the chunk boundary, and then you can just walk through the tripwire. And after the lag spike is over, I will not activate the tripwire because I was not registered in this chunk while I was walking through the tripwire. So like I will do on entity collided with block calls on the tripwire, and the tripwire will look, is there any entity which I'm colliding with, and it will not find the player. So I will quickly wait for the lag spike to be over. Okay, so now the leg spike is over, the piston clock is working again, and you see I just walked through the tripwire and I did not activate the tripwire because I just did it during a leg spike and I crossed the chunk boundary, and then the string doesn't find me. So I managed to get past that. So this problem can be solved using NaN arrows, which is a trick shown in many videos of test 137E29, that in 1.8, if you have a dispenser firing an arrow into a slab, then the arrow will behave as if it was an arrow whose position is not a number, in the sense that it will collide everything in the entire subchunk it's in. And if you push it with a piston, then it actually gets position not a number. But before that, it's registered in a subchunk and just behaves similarly. And for a long time, I thought that they actually had position NaN, but RPM told me that he actually didn't manage to find any NaN in the data of those arrows. So maybe the terminology is slightly misleading, but we use those arrows because those arrows have a nice property that they collide with all blocks in the subchunk, but they don't send out any entity collided with block calls to the blocks in the subchunk. So if you have a subchunk and an NaN arrow is in the subchunk and the player wants into the chunk during a leg spike and wants into a pressure plate, then the pressure plate will be pressed by the arrow, even if a pressure plate can't find the player hitbox. Now let's try the same thing again, except this time we put an NaN arrow into this chunk. So we have a dispenser facing into a slab, and then we fire the dispenser into the slab. Once you do this, you need to make sure that you always stay more than 2 blocks away from the subchunk, because otherwise you will pick up the arrow because it's everywhere in the subchunk. Okay, yeah. Let's put this NaN arrow here. Okay, we now have an NaN arrow in the subchunk. And if we now again make a leg spike, we have a leg spike now, and now we walk here through this tripwire. Then once the leg spike is finished, now the TNT will ignite, because now the player did an entity collided with block call on the tripwire, and after that the tripwire found the arrow, and the arrow then activated the tripwire. So this is how you can make tripwire work again, even if you crossed a chunk boundary during a leg spike by using NaN arrows. So the idea is when we have the stronghold chunk which is unloaded and the player wants 2 the stronghold chunks over pressure plates, and we have NaN arrows in all the chunks, and after we get to the chunk borders, it is no longer the player hitbox which causes the crash, but the player just does the on entity collided with block call on the pressure plate, and then the hitbox of the NaN arrow causes the pressure plate to do the instantaneous crash. So we now understand the basics of the setup. So the setup requires instantaneous. The setup requires us to prepare NaN arrows. When you turn on instantaneous, it will also create an invisible chunk at the location where the stronghold is. So over here we have a stronghold, and we make this stronghold chunk here into an invisible chunk. So this chunk here is invisible, and we need to do this because we want to prepare the NaN arrows, and those need to be in entity processing chunks for 1 game tick, but we do not want to populate the stronghold. But if this needs to be entity processing while this chunk over here needs to not populate, then we need to fully load this chunk without populating it, and this just means that we need to make it invisible. Yeah, and then basically what we have in this contraption is we have like this line of pressure plates and strings, and the idea is that we create a leg spike by using instantaneous, and then a repeater contraption which is very laggy on instantaneous, and then you run over these pressure plates during the leg spike and through all the strings, and at the end there are even wooden buttons, and the wooden buttons act like pressure plates when there is an NaN arrow nearby, and then you can run to the stronghold and instant mine a slime block through a fire block and then get the end portal frame item. Okay, something I should mention about this leg spike is you might need to adjust it to your hardware. So if a leg spike here is too long, then you might want to destroy those lamps and place them like somewhere over here, and when the leg spike is shorter, like if you move it 1 module over this lamp, then the leg spike will be roughly half as long, and if you move it over here, it's 1/4 as long, and if you move it over here, it's 1/8 time as long. And if the leg spike isn't long enough for you to run all the way to a stronghold and mine the block there, then you can just extend this pattern with repeaters by 1, and then the leg spike will be twice as long. So this is how you can adapt the setup to your hardware. and then just put a lamp here. Now, if you build with contraption, it's very important that you know about biome restrictions, because in our setup, we have ITT switch further away from the stronghold because it needs to be in a different biome. So in our setup, the ITT switch is in a mega taiga biome, while the stronghold is in a mega taiga hills biome. And this is important because if you put both things in the same biome, then it doesn't work, because if you turn on ITT, then the biome in which the ITT switch is in will be already decorating. And if you then try to mine the end portal frame in the stronghold, then it will actually crash in the digging packet before it actually mines the end portal frame item, because it's already decorating. And finally, with the biome restrictions, you need to be careful that if you are in single player and you use multiple backups of this world and do multiple attempts, then after you turn on Inteltics in one world, then the biome decorator will be already decorating also in all other single player worlds after that. So if you want to do multiple attempts, you need to make sure you restart the whole game after every time you switch to a new world, because otherwise the Inteltics might not turn on. So this right here is the full setup. If you want to build the setup yourself in survival, you need to save state 3 chunks. Firstly, you need to save state 1 chunk over here, so that you can turn Inteltics. So this right here is the ITT switch. In the world download, this chunk here is ungenerated, and when it gets generated and populated, it will place a water pocket somewhere in this stone radiator structure, and then this water pocket flows down here and activates this dispenser down here, and that then updates to process it and turns on Inteltics. The important thing is that this chunk here over here, like in the middle of a population area, we need to have a biome which is different from the biome of a stronghold where we get the end portal frame. So right here we have a mega taiga biome. While if we look over here to the stronghold and in the middle of a population area of a stronghold, then we see here we have a mega taiga hills biome, and that's a different biome, and those two biomes need to be different for it to work. Then here at the stronghold, we will need to save state 2 chunks, because in the contraption we make the stronghold invisible. Making it invisible isn't strictly necessary, but for the world download it was very convenient because it makes it easier to prepare the NaN arrows. Because when you create the NaN arrows, they need to be an entity processing chunk, so everything around the stronghold needs to be loaded. And so I just make it invisible so I can fully load everything around it without populating it. So you need to like save state 2 chunks next to each other, and then like build some redstone so that the stronghold chunk can become invisible. And for the invisible chunk generator, we also have like a dispenser right here, which updates the process when it tries to place a different stronghold room next to it. So like in the adjacent chunk, you just search for some kind of stronghold room, and then try to take a block update from that and update to press it. And if Inteltics are already on, then it will make the stronghold chunk invisible. And then lastly, you need to save state the stronghold chunk itself, so that you can then place the contraption here, like place the hopper minecart here, and then place a slime block here at this position, and then have like some netherrack and fire in front of here. And then you can mine the slime block through the fire and silk touch mine the end portal frames, and other than that, you just build the contraption like it is in the world download. And if you want to look at the contraption, then I would recommend just clicking the first lever and then flying in, because when you flick the first lever, then the stronghold chunk will be invisible and will not populate, and then you can also look at the contraption which we built in the stronghold room here. And all the pressure plates and strings and wooden buttons are just here to update to press all the player movement packets. And other than that, for the invisible chunk generator and the Inteltics switch are used beacons, because they can schedule player actions. You can slightly redesign the setup without beacons if you make budded rail lines going from the location of those chunks to the player platform. But that's basically the whole setup. Bye. And thanks for my Patreons for financially supporting my videos.